India's cities are choking on poison. The rivers are undrinkable, the air is lethal, and in many places, people still defecate in the open. Not because they want to, but because they have no other option. And inside this collapsing environment, a silent epidemic is tearing the country apart. Heart attacks in 30-year-olds, kids stunted by malnutrition and disease, millions of diabetics who don't even know if they're sick until it's too late. This isn't about bad luck or bad genetics. It's the result of decades of deliberate choices, the consequences of prioritizing GDP over human health, of worshiping cheap calories while ignoring poisoned water, and of chasing modernity while leaving sanitation, nutrition, and public health all in the dust. India didn't just make itself sick, it made itself sick to death. And unless it changes course, and fast, this could be the most self-inflicted national collapse in modern history. A 32-year-old software engineer drops dead at his desk in Bangalore. Heart attack, no warning. His colleagues thought he was just napping. He'd been working 12-hour days, 6 days a week. He seemed healthy, he played cricket on the weekends, and he was dead before the ambulance arrived. A woman in Mumbai who weighed 55 kilograms, barely overweight by any standard, discovered that she had diabetes, high blood pressure, and fatty liver disease, all three at age 28. The doctor asked about her diet. She eats at home mostly, rice, dal, vegetables, traditional food. Nothing obviously wrong, except her body is falling apart anyway. In Delhi, a 12-year-old boy is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, the disease his grandparents got in their 60s. He's not even a teenager. His parents can't believe it. They don't feed him junk food. He's not obese, but his pancreas is already giving up. Walk into any hospital in urban India and you'll see it. Waiting rooms full of people in their 30s and 40s. Diabetic clinics overflowing. Cardiac wards treating patients who should be decades away from heart problems. These aren't outliers. They're becoming the norm. Right now, 100 million Indians have diabetes. That's more than the entire population of Germany. If you add the pre-diabetics, people whose blood sugar is ticking toward disaster, you're looking at a number larger than Pakistan's entire population. By middle age, more than half of all Indian adults show signs of metabolic dysfunction. Their bodies are breaking down decades before they actually should. And here's the twisted part. Many of these people look normal. They're not obese, they don't eat fast food every day. Some even exercise, but their blood work tells a horror story. Indians develop diabetes at body weights that would be considered healthy in Europe or America. A BMI of 23, which is normal weight, can trigger full-blown metabolic disease in an Indian body. Europeans would need to be clinically obese to face that same risk. It's called the thin-fat phenotype. You look lean on the outside, but inside, your organs are drowning in fat. You'd think it was genetics, some cruel evolutionary curse. Wrong. Yes, Indians do have a genetic predisposition, and that story starts in the darkest chapter of their country's history. For nearly 200 years under British colonial rule, India suffered repeated famines, not occasional food shortages, but catastrophic mass starvation events that killed tens of millions of people. During the Victorian era alone, 30 million Indians died of famine. Over the entire colonial period, more than 60 million lives were lost to hunger and its diseases. Entire villages disappeared. Families buried their children. People ate grass, bark, anything. And the survivors? Well, their bodies remembered. Generation after generation grew up in starvation conditions. Bodies adapted to survive. The ones who made it through were the ones whose metabolism could hoard every calorie, store fat aggressively, and prepare for the next famine. Women who were malnourished in childhood had babies with low birth weight, and those babies grew up stunted, their bodies programmed for scarcity. Then they had children of their own under the same harsh conditions. For 200 years, natural selection favored the bodies that could survive on almost nothing. Evolution turned Indians into survival machines, the thrifty genotype, scientists call it. Fast forward to today, and those survival genes are still there, but now there's food everywhere. Abundant food, cheap food, food delivered to your door. The biology that saved Indians from famine is now killing them in abundance. But here's the thing that nobody wants to admit. Genetics, yeah, they might load the gun, but it doesn't pull the trigger. Genetics explain maybe 20% of the crisis, but the other 80%? India did that to itself. And the first way that it poisoned people? With the very same thing that saved them from starvation. 1960s. India was on the brink of another massive famine. The country couldn't feed itself. Memories of the Bengal famine, where millions died in the 1940s, were still fresh. So India launched the Green Revolution: high-yield rice and wheat, intensive farming, fertilizers and irrigation everywhere. And it worked. Within a decade, India went from food deficient to food surplus. Granaries filled. The specter of mass starvation, it faded. It was a triumph and a trap, because the Green Revolution had one singular focus: produce maximum calories, feed everyone, stop the dying. But nobody thought about nutrition. The government subsidized rice and wheat, guaranteed minimum prices. Farmers abandoned traditional crops, so millets, lentils, diverse grains, and they planted rice and wheat everywhere. It was more profitable, it was more secure. The public distribution system flooded the country with cheap rice and wheat. Ration shops in every village. Nobody would starve. But nobody thought about what this diet would do over 50 years. Today, the average Indian gets 62% of their daily calories from carbohydrates, mostly refined carbohydrates. White rice, refined wheat flour, cheap, filling, everywhere. In rural areas and poor households, though, it's even worse. 70% of their calories are from starch. Protein, maybe 10%. Fruits and vegetables, barely there. Let's be specific. A typical South Indian breakfast, idli or dosa, made from refined white rice. A typical North Indian breakfast is paratha, made from refined wheat flour. Lunch, well, white rice with dal and vegetables. But the rice dominates the plate. And dinner, more of the same. It's not that these foods are inherently evil at all, it's just the proportions. The lack of variety, the relentless carb-heavy pattern, meal after meal, day after day, year after year. And those traditional whole grains that used to sustain Indian villages for centuries, millets, sorghum, brown rice, all of it, abandoned. Seen as poor people's food, inferior, shameful. Millets are nutritionally superior to white rice. Higher protein, more fiber, lower glycemic index. They don't spike blood sugar the way that refined grains do. But after the Green Revolution, when white rice became abundant and cheap, eating millets became a mark of poverty, a backward practice, something you did only if you couldn't afford proper food. Meanwhile, white rice became aspirational, a symbol of prosperity. The whiter and more refined, the better. Nobody realized that they were trading in complex carbs and fiber for just pure glucose bumps. Every meal spikes blood sugar, 3 times a day, every day, for decades. The body produces insulin to manage that sugar, again and again, but eventually the cells stop listening, and insulin resistance sets in. That is diabetes, and heart disease, and fatty liver, and stroke. Indians are eating themselves to death with the exact food that once saved them. And families are spending about 15 to 20% of their household income treating the diseases that their diet is causing. The government still subsidizes rice and wheat. India exports millions of tons of rice every year, while importing lentils and proteins that its people desperately need. In 2025, Maharashtra, one of India's wealthiest states, canceled a program to add eggs to school lunches. The cost? 50 crore rupees. That's about $6 million. That's pocket change in a state budget, but protein for malnourished children? Oh no, it's too expensive. So the carbs keep flowing, and the subsidies keep flowing, and the disease keeps spreading. But if you think that it's just the food killing them, wait till you see what they're breathing. Until 2011, just 15 years ago, 70% of rural Indian households had no toilet. None. 500 million people were defecating in the open, in fields, along railway tracks, behind houses, on riverbanks. Not by choice in most cases, not because they wanted to, but because there was no alternative, no infrastructure, no toilets, no sanitation system. In urban slums, the situation was barely better. One toilet would be shared by 50 families, or public toilets would be so filthy and dangerous that people just avoided them. Open defecation wasn't a secret. It was normalized. It was part of daily life. Something you did before sunrise, before anyone could see. Dignified people reduced to this indignity every single day. And the consequences? Catastrophic. Fecal matter would contaminate the soil. It would seep into wells. It would wash into rivers. Flies landed on waste and then food, and the cycle of contamination was just endless and unavoidable. Children would crawl through dirt teeming with bacteria and parasites. They played in the same fields where waste accumulated, drank from wells contaminated by runoff. Every monsoon, disease would explode. Diarrhea, cholera, typhoid, hepatitis. India had some of the highest rates of these illnesses in the world. Childhood diarrhea alone kills more than 1 million children around the world every year. And it gets worse. Chronic childhood infections will stunt growth, weaken immune systems, they'll damage organs. A child who gets diarrhea repeatedly in their first 5 years of life, well, they don't just get sick. Their body permanently changes, growth stunts, brain development slows. The immune system learns to constantly fight infections instead of developing properly. Kids who survive repeated bouts of diarrhea and gut diseases grow up with compromised bodies, shorter, weaker, more vulnerable to disease. And here's the connection that nobody talks about. Early life malnutrition and infection, followed by adult overnutrition, dramatically increases the risk of diabetes and heart disease. India set up its children to be sick from birth. And then there's the water. 70% of India's surface water is unsafe for human use. Not unpleasant, but unsafe. Toxic. More than half the country's rivers are heavily polluted with sewage, industrial waste, agricultural runoff, and garbage. Every single day, 40 million liters of untreated sewage flows into India's rivers and lakes. Every single day. Think about what that means. 40 million liters every 24 hours. Never stopping, never treated. Flowing directly from homes, from slums, from broken pipes, into the water that people downstream will drink, bathe in, and use for cooking. India generates 72 billion liters of sewage every day. It has the capacity to treat 37%. It actually only treats about 28%. And the rest? Well, it goes straight into the water, into rivers, into lakes, into the groundwater that people drink. The Ganges River, for example, sacred, revered, worshipped, absorbs billions of liters of raw sewage. Cremated bodies float alongside plastic bottles and industrial waste. People breathe it in. They perform religious rituals. Some even drink it, believing that the holy water will purify them. The Yamuna River flows through Delhi, and it's so polluted that parts of it are ecologically dead. Oxygen levels drop to near zero. Fish can't survive. In some stretches, toxic foam piles up meters high, floating like snow made out of poison. Delhi dumps 641 million liters of untreated sewage into the Yamuna every day. One city, one river, enough sewage to fill 256 Olympic swimming pools every single day. In some villages in Punjab, groundwater contamination has caused cancer rates to spike so high, they're called cancer villages. Entire communities poisoned by their own drinking water. Every family has lost someone. Parents bury children, children watch parents waste away. And then there's the air. India's air pollution kills between 1.7 and 2 million people every year. Let that sink in. Air pollution alone kills more Indians annually than all the COVID deaths during the worst years of the pandemic. Every single person in India, all 1.4 billion, live in areas where air pollution exceeds World Health Organization safety guidelines. In Delhi, annual average PM 2.5 levels hit 100 micrograms per cubic meter. The World Health Organization guideline, 5. Now, during winter, pollution spikes to 700 to 1,000. Breathing Delhi's air on a bad day, that's like smoking multiple cigarettes. The smog is so thick that you can't see across the street. Schools close, hospitals overflow with respiratory emergencies. People are coughing up blood. And here's what almost nobody knows. Air pollution, it doesn't just damage lungs, it causes diabetes. Chronic exposure to fine particulate matter triggers systemic inflammation in the body. That inflammation disrupts insulin sensitivity. It's one more thing pushing Indians toward metabolic disease. So you have bodies that are genetically vulnerable to diabetes, that are fed a diet that spikes blood sugar constantly, and they're breathing in air that inflames organs and worsens insulin resistance. It's not a crisis, it's a perfect storm. And the environment isn't done. Mountains of garbage, literal mountains, some as tall as multi-story buildings. India generates 65 million tons of solid waste every year. Only about 70% is even collected. Less than 20% is processed or recycled. The rest, it just sits, it rots, it breeds disease. Stagnant trash pools water, mosquitoes swarm, dengue and malaria spread. Methane gas builds up. Sometimes the piles catch fire, adding toxic smoke to already poisoned air. Walk through any Indian city and you'll see piles of mixed garbage on every corner. Plastic, food waste, metal, glass, everything rotting together. The government spent billions cleaning up rivers, building sewage plants, launching sanitation campaigns. But the scale of the problem, it's so vast and enforcement is so weak that progress is just a drop in an ocean of filth. India tried to sprint into modernity while leaving behind the basic infrastructure: clean water, waste treatment, pollution control, all that make modern life survivable. And somehow, that's still not the worst part, because even if Indians survived the food and the filth and the poison, their lifestyle would finish the job. Indians work some of the longest hours in the world. 50 to 60-hour weeks are standard. In tech and corporate jobs, people stay in the office until almost midnight. Blue-collar workers juggle multiple gigs just to make ends meet. Commutes in gridlock cities add 2 or 3 hours to already brutal workdays. There's no time to cook healthy food. There's no time to exercise. Heck, there's barely time to sleep. And the stress is crushing. 60 to 80% of Indian workers experience chronic work-related stress: anxiety, burnout, sleep disorders, depression. Stress floods the body with cortisol. Cortisol causes weight gain, especially around the abdomen. It raises blood pressure and it disrupts blood sugar control. Chronic stress is gasoline on the fire of metabolic disease. And because Indians are so busy working, they've stopped moving. Traditional life involved walking, manual labor, physical activities that are built into daily routines. But modern urban life? Sitting in traffic, sitting at a desk, sitting on the couch, sitting at dinner. Many cities have no sidewalks, they have no bike lanes. Parks are crowded, they're poorly maintained, or they're non-existent. And the air is too toxic to jog outside anyway. Daily step counts that were once 10,000 are now 3,000 or often less. Exercise, the most powerful tool against diabetes and heart disease, has been engineered out of the modern Indian life. And then there's the food explosion. Fast food chains like McDonald's, Domino's, KFC, they're in every city. Street food has become oilier, sweeter, saltier. Packaged snacks flood supermarkets, and soda consumption has skyrocketed. India is now one of the world's largest consumers of sugary drinks. Ultra-processed foods are designed to be hyper-palatable, loaded with sugar, salt, and fat. They hijack the brain's reward system. People overeat them and don't even realize it. And they're cheap. They're cheaper than fresh vegetables, they're cheaper than fruit, and they're cheaper than protein. A bottle of soda costs less than a bag of apples. So poor families trying to stretch their rupees buy what fills their stomach fast: instant noodles, biscuits, chips, soda. It's a trap. That food is affordable, but it's killing them too. And there's no regulation, no soda tax, no junk food advertising bans, no clear labeling. The market floods with poison, and the government does nothing. So now you have a population, again, that's genetically vulnerable, eating refined carbs, breathing toxic air, drinking contaminated water, working brutal hours under constant stress, and sedentary by design. And the result? Heart attacks in men in their 40s, diabetes diagnoses in people in their 20s, a healthcare system overwhelmed with chronic disease. India's average age of onset for heart disease is almost a decade younger than in Western countries. And every year, it gets younger. So why hasn't the government fixed this? Well, because they don't want to admit what they've done. India still subsidizes rice and wheat production while the country imports lentils and oilseeds. The government protects the crops that are making people sick and ignores the ones they need. In 2025, Maharashtra canceled that school egg program. Yeah, $6 million to provide protein to malnourished children, and the state government called it too expensive. Too expensive to prevent malnutrition in one of India's wealthiest states. Meanwhile, India spends billions on agricultural subsidies that keep rice and wheat cheap and plentiful, even though that diet is fueling the diabetes epidemic. There's no meaningful regulation of junk food marketing to children either. No restrictions on soda advertising. No trans fat bans that are actually enforced. For decades, police treated environmental protection as a luxury that India couldn't afford. Industrial growth was the priority, and pollution was the price of progress. Only when the smog became so thick that it was literally visible did anyone take it seriously. And even then, enforcement remains weak. Labor laws don't limit excessive working hours. Cities are designed for cars, not people, and there's no push for work-life balance or wellness programs. The mantra has always been work harder, grow faster, and worry about health later. Later has arrived, and the bill is staggering. Air pollution alone costs India 9.5% of GDP, almost 10% of their entire economy, lost to premature death and disease from toxic air. Water pollution, environmental degradation, and lost productivity from illness are bleeding the country dry. And it's only getting worse. India is trying to become a superpower with a population that is chronically ill. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You can't build a superpower on the backs of sick people. A workforce that's diabetic, hypertensive, and dying young is not a demographic dividend. It's a demographic disaster. Young people who should be in the most productive years of their life are instead managing chronic diseases. They're popping pills, visiting doctors, missing work. Families are bankrupted by medical costs. Government budgets are consumed by treating preventable diseases instead of investing in education, infrastructure, or defense. India escaped famine, they defeated starvation, and achieved food security, and then engineered its own collapse by ignoring what came next. The country prioritized quantity over quality, GDP growth over human health, industrialization over livability. And now, 3 generations later, the consequences are undeniable. India made itself sick, not through ignorance, but through choice. Every policy decision that subsidized rice over protein, every industrial regulation that wasn't enforced, every city designed without green space or clean air in mind, every school lunch program that was canceled to save a few crores. Those were choices, and those choices are killing millions. So what happens next? Well, if nothing changes, India's future is grim. By 2050, diabetes and heart disease will cripple the workforce. Healthcare systems will collapse under the weight of chronic illness. The demographic dividend will turn into a demographic nightmare. Other countries will learn from India's mistakes. They'll see what happens when you sacrifice health for growth, when you ignore the environment, when you let industry run wild and feed people poison. India will become a cautionary tale. The country that had everything, a young population, economic growth, global ambition, and lost it all because they couldn't keep its people healthy. Unless India makes different choices, like now. Shift subsidies from rice and wheat to vegetables, fruits, and proteins. Regulate junk food marketing. Enforce pollution controls. Invest in sewage treatment and clean water. Redesign cities for walking, cycling, green spaces. Protect workers from exploitation and burnout. It's all possible. None of this is irreversible, but it requires admitting a problem and acting like the crisis it is. Because right now, India is racing toward a cliff, and the world is watching to see if it jumps, or if it finally hits the brakes. So here's the question. Will India save itself before it's too late, or will it become the first nation in history to engineer its own downfall? Not through war, not through famine, but through the slow, deliberate poisoning of its own people. What do you think? Well, hey, let us know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe, because this story, it's far from over.